to pull back, and it does make a difference whether the handle, which I call that short period, is down 8 or 10% or 10 or 15. If you're having a market that's rougher and tougher, and it can last 1 week or 2 weeks or 3 or 4 or 5. But when it comes out of it, the volume should come into it. And this is a classic pattern, so you want to learn to recognize that pattern, because what you should be doing is every weekend going through a whole bunch of charts looking for these patterns. And I can think of all sorts of stocks. Apple is a great one that I saw the first cup with a handle that it was being formed. And I looked at it, and it was almost a perfect cup with a handle. And the reason I was looking at it is the prior record for the prior 2 or 3 years had been very poor. But they had turned, and they were showing a quarter up strong, and the pattern was there. So you can come up with the next big name just by the pattern recognition. Now, what you have to do, once you recognize, wow, this looks like a classic cup with a handle, now you got to do your homework. Are the sales there? Are they increasing? Is the earning power increasing? Does it have any sponsorship that's decent at all? You go through and try to figure out, well, what are they doing that's different now than before? And maybe they've got a new product that's really selling. So you don't buy just because, boy, this pattern is there. You buy because, boy, this pattern is there, and it has good earnings and good sales, and I understand what I'm doing. So you want all these things together.
And you once told me that, it's kind of an interesting point, that these are the patterns of accumulation. Let's talk about that for a second.
Well, a stock's going to correct at some point, and it can, if it corrects 10, 15, 20, 25%, depending on what the market's doing, that can be a normal correction of 5 to 7 weeks. Then it should rally back up. And if it is a sound, strong stock, it should rally back up into the upper part of the pattern and then build a little handle. So it would probably stop maybe 5% away from the old high and then build a handle. Now, if it has that correction and starts running up, but it does its work in the lower half of that pattern, it might get away with it a little bit later, but that is a sign of not being as strong and powerful. In other words, after you've corrected, in this instance, for 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5 weeks or whatever, it bounces strong and it gets into the upper half fairly quick. So I call that a prior uptrend, and you want to see that, and you want to see a little bit of volume. Then it builds its handle, and the handle should dry up in volume. You don't want to see big volume on down weeks in the handle. And then when it breaks out, you should get the volume. So you not only recognize the pattern, but you understand how to look at the volume that's occurring at different key points.
Okay, and this happens to be something you will remember. Actually, you and I both owned this back then, and I remember it looking so perfect that I was worried that the whole world would know, because it was such a perfect cup.
Well, you don't have to worry about that, because first of all, most people that invest don't do very well because they invest by, oh, I like this stock, I think it's a good stock, and then they buy it, and if it doesn't work, they sit with it. Well, it's a good stock, and I know it'll come back, and they do all kinds of crazy things based on how they feel or what they think. Basically, in the market, what you think isn't worth much. You've got to interpret what's actually happening and understand it. And most people have trouble, and that's a lot of work, you know. And everybody doesn't want a lot of work. They just want to say, hey, tell me what to buy.
Right, and then they have no clue on selling, and that's why it's so important to learn how to catch fish on your own. Do this on your own. It can be incredibly rewarding.
Well, that brings up at one point that maybe we want to talk about it later, but you are going to make mistakes. And when you make them, you want to cut them as quick as you can. I've said arbitrarily that I don't want to lose ever more than 8%. So if it's down 8% from what I paid for it, out it goes. I won't even wait for 8% in most cases. Now, maybe you might say if it goes down 4 or 5% from what you paid for it, not off the peak, but from what you paid for it, you might sell half. And if it goes down to where it's now down 7% or 8%, you could sell the rest. So, but just cut them short so that your losses are all short, and you make some 20% gains, and every once in a while you make a 50 or 100% gain.
See, that's a good point you're bringing up. We actually don't always wait for 7-8% because we see that it's not acting the way we thought it should act. It's acting a little strange, and so we start backing away. And that's just plain experience of knowing how they should act at certain points on the chart, right?
Well, now that's a key issue, and I can tell you another thing about what experience will show you. You're going to buy stocks. Let's say over a year you buy 10 or 15 stocks. Well, of the 10 stocks, what if you're wrong on 5 or only wrong on 3 or 4? You got to cut out of them now. And I don't think people operate this way. Now, there is a concept here that forces you into the point to where you rarely ever are going to have 8% losses, if we say that's the limit. For example, that you're buying a stock and the first stock works and the second stock doesn't. So, and now you buy a third stock and it works, and then the fourth stock doesn't. So now you bought 4 or 5 stocks, and one of them is really working great, and it breaks out and holds tight or pulls back to a moving average line that's right, and you've got a chance. First of all, if it's right and it goes up 2.5%, you automatically add some.
Right.
On your second buy, it ought to be automatic.
Pyramiding into position.
Yeah. So as I'm getting a couple of things that are working, I'm buying something. Well, where am I getting the money? I'm usually selling it from my weakest stock. So after a while, by doing that, I rarely ever would have a stock down 8% because so that when it was down 3%, because I needed the money to follow up on one that was working, and I had to get the money from somewhere. So I'm always selling my weakest, and I think it's maybe once or twice a year I might have a 7 or 8% loss.
You know, it's funny, deja vu. I can remember years ago as a kid, you kept harping on me, look, just master the system. The system will force you where you should be, not just in respect to the market, that was one, but also on this point, portfolio management, pushing more money into what's working and pulling money out of what is not working or is too slow. And you kept saying, look, just master the system, it will guide you.
Yeah, it kind of forces you. And that's why my second buy on a stock that starts to go up and is working is always automatic. If the pivot buy point is $50 and it goes up 2.5%, 3%, I'm going to automatically follow up and buy. Because I don't know which one's going to wind up being my biggest stock, but the market will slowly and gradually tell me over a number of weeks. And so I make a second buy, and now I get a chance somewhere to make a third buy. And now
no thinking, automatic.
Yeah, and the market tells you what's working and what isn't, and you just have to be able to handle it right.
Okay, so let's move on. That was great. Okay, we talked about that. Focus on the percent from the pivot. That's simply that exact spot. And then Bill talking about pyramiding in. The second purchase is 2% above that spot where you went in on the first purchase, and it's a smaller amount on the second purchase. Let's keep going. Okay.
There's your buy point, and you buy maybe up 5% from that. So it's $100. Well, 5% would be $5, so you could go to 105. And beyond that, you're sort of chasing the stock.
And that's what we've got here. Actually, Bill, we've got pattern recognition and MarketSmith turned on. And so the blue zone is that 5% for any newcomers. And we are drawing the cup and handle, and then the pivot are the 2 dashed lines at the top. And then, of course, it breaks through the pivot, and you can make these purchases Bill's describing within the blue zone.
In order to handle this system correctly, you've got to be watching and anticipating that this stock looks like it's building the cup with a handle, and here's my buy point. And let's say you're 1.5 points away from it. I would not try to buy early before it breaks out, because sometimes it never breaks out. Yeah. I would wait, and when it hits that point, you got to be buying it.
Yeah, I've done that a few times.
So yeah, you can't